Hello, good evening. Zimbabwe is a failed state. 43 years of corrupt and tyrannical misrule by Zanu PF has left the country in an economic mess and political paralysis. If we're going to get out of this mess, we really have got to change. It cannot be business as usual. I'll be coming back to this theme again and again and again. Because I genuinely believe that we can change and we must change if we're going to get out of this mess. We've just had an election in August. It was rigged. Most of us, some of us at least, expected it to be rigged. I mean, the evidence was there. But some of the key players in the election process believed that they could win rigged elections. This is what I mean by business as usual. We have had this kind of nonsense for the last 43 years. This cannot carry on. So, a few days ago, I wrote an article in which I was saying that we must hold the opposition to account. In the late 1990s, the nation came to a consensus that as long as Zanu PF retains the carte blanche powers to rig elections, we will never get the regime out of office. And as long as we are stuck with the regime, the economy will never improve. That was an important moment. And the nation decided to put as number one top priority the need to implement democratic reforms to stop Zanu PF rigging elections. It wasn't rocket science. As long as Zanu PF is able to rig the elections and stay in power, we are stuck with them. So short of going to fight another war, liberation war, one way of making sure that Zanu PF is removed is making sure that we elect an opposition that will implement the democratic reforms to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. And in that article, I was arguing that we have got the opposition here that has been in power since the late 1990s. MDC was formed in 1999 on the ticket to bring about the democratic changes the nation was dying for. And after 23 years, 5 of which in the GNU, there has not been any meaningful democratic reform implemented. And hence the reason why we still have the same problem of rigged elections. And by blaming MDC, I touched a sensitive nerve. Some of the individuals who read the article fired back and say, why am I holding only MDC to account for failing to implement the reforms? Why not Zanu PF too? This has become a meaningless argument. We know that Zanu PF created this de facto one-party state for the purposes of retaining its iron grip on power. The reason why we have risked, or ordinary people of Zimbabwe have risked life and limb to vote the opposition into power these last 23 years is because they knew that Zanu PF will never implement those reforms. We all agree that Zanu PF will never implement reforms and reform itself out of power. So why are we, after 23 years, turning around and expecting Zanu PF to implement reforms? In a functioning democracy, the government of the day is responsible for running the daily activities of government, coming up with proposing new laws, making sure that if there's any problem, those problems are dealt with and contained and so forth, so that society continue to function normally, allocating resources where resources are required. The function of the opposition is to hold the government of the day to account. And in the case of Zimbabwe, the number one function of the opposition was to implement the democratic reforms. They had the golden opportunity to do so during the 2008 to 2013 GNU. They failed to do so. Why? Because they're incompetent. We cannot keep on hiding and pretending that the opposition is competent when it's not. One of the issues that has come up again and again is this issue of religion. I've got here a video of Nelson Chamisa explaining his religious zeal, as I would call it. Let's just listen to him.
We are all creatures of God. We are created by the universal author. We are not just objects. We are products of what God has created us to be. So you can't take politics outside the realm of the author and the creator. This universe is a presiding authority, and God is at the center of everything. Mr. Mnangagwa believes in other things. He must be allowed to believe in those things. That's what democracy and diversity is all about. I've not imposed God on the people. I've said that is my source of anchor. That is my faith. That is what drives me as a leader. That is my source of strength. If you would say that that's a weakness, why would they deploy resources to fight a weak man? I'm so proud of my God. He has elevated me twice. We have results to be able to stand in this environment and to be able to defeat a mammoth institution like Zanu PF. It's not a joke. It's not a...
Well, let's stop right there. I think what we need to clarify here is what Chamisa is saying. Chamisa has again and again, on a number of occasions, come back with this argument that God is in it. For instance, in the recent elections, these August elections. Chamisa said that his party, Triple C, would win big because he has plugged all the vote rigging loopholes, for example. And they always qualified it with God is in it. Well, I think we need clarity here. We, or most of us, are religious, or at least have some religion background. They know the Bible. He is a pastor. He should understand the Bible even more. In the Bible, they are ordinary people, ordinary citizens. Then there are priests who are empowered to carry out certain religious functions, ceremonies, trained in that field. And then in the Bible, there are very special individuals, the prophets, who could interpret events or would be inspired by God to understand events and interpret them as the will of God. When Chamisa says God is in it, is he saying that he is now speaking like Moses, who was able to be inspired by God to do this, do that, and God was in it? His policy to participate in these recent elections without even a verified voters roll, claiming that he has plugged all the vote rigging loopholes, and claiming that God was in it, comes back to that issue. Was really God in it? Was it God who told him that, yes, plug those holes, you have plugged them, and got confirmation from God that he has plugged all those holes? Or was it just his wish? Or in this case, was he deliberately misleading the people? He wanted the people to participate in these elections, knowing fully well that the process is flawed. But he wanted to assure them that they will still win. Triple still will still win big. Well, as a matter of fact, Triple C did not win big. Zanu PF blatantly rigged these elections. SADC, all the AU, all the election observers from all over the world who witnessed the elections testified that those elections were a farce. So we come back to what Chamisa himself was claiming. Did he plug all the vote rigging holes, or was he lying? If he was lying, why did he say God was in it, when clearly God was not in it? I think people should learn to separate divine or religious matters from politics. Politicians should be held to democratic account. The people should be able to go back to the politicians and say, you promised this and you failed to deliver. Chamisa's promise of a big triple C win in the last election was no more a mirage than Emerson Mnangagwa's claim of vision 2030, where all Zimbabweans will be enjoying an upper middle class lifestyle. It is a mirage. The country's economy is in decline, has been in decline ever since the country gained its independence. Nothing that Mnangagwa has done since getting into power, since the 2017 military coup, has given anyone any reason to believe the country's economy is on the recovery. It is not. Looting has gone into overdrive. During Mugabe's time, looting was confined to diamonds. Now it has gone on to diamonds, gold, lithium, and many other products. The country is being looted at an incredible rate. At this rate, really is difficult to see how the country will ever recover. And we just had another election in which Mnangagwa rigged, and therefore then was able to extend his stay in power. Another 5 years of this wholesale looting is unthinkable. If we want to recover from this mess, we really, as a people, have to say it cannot be business as usual. These politicians must be held to account. The issue of the opposition playing a meaningful role to ensure that elections are free, fair, and credible must be looked at with the agency it deserves. The idea that the likes of Nelson Chamisa can tell people that God is in it, participate in flawed elections again and again, and pretend that he has got God's inspiration is pathetic. Chamisa is a politician, and not just an ordinary politician, a corrupt and breathtakingly incompetent one. After 23 years, MDC/CCC have failed to implement even one meaningful democratic reform. That is the reality we have got to deal with here. And as long as we have got an opposition that is participating in flawed elections out of greed, and thus perpetuating the dictatorship, we cannot seriously expect any meaningful democratic change. The next 5 years, if we are going to stop a repeat of the 2023 elections, another rigged elections in 2028, we, the people of Zimbabwe, have got absolutely to tear up the manual and start thinking afresh. Nations generally get the government they deserve. We in Zimbabwe, we cannot deny that we have got the government we deserve. We really have done nothing to deserve anything other than this corrupt, incompetent, and tyrannical Zanu PF dictatorship, complete with equally corrupt, incompetent, and utterly useless opposition. And they are taking advantage of the ignorance of the ordinary Zimbabweans, the naivety of the ordinary Zimbabweans, to promise them the moon, which they know they will never deliver, and use that as cover in the case of the opposition for their failure to implement even one meaningful reform during the GNU, and for participating in flawed elections to perpetuate the Zanu PF dictatorship. And for Zanu PF, they are using it as the cover for rigging elections and claiming the elections were free, fair, and credible. How can elections be free, fair, and credible when you do not even have something as basic as a verified voters roll? And yet, that is Mnangagwa, what Mnangagwa is claiming. And to justify his continued rule, he insists that Zimbabwe is making progress. That Zimbabwe is a sovereign nation and we are making great strides in terms of development. He insists that Vision 2030 is coming. Already this is November. So next year, 2024, will be 6 years away. The economy is in such a mess that unemployment has soared to over 80% and have stayed there for decades. Many of the country's professionals have left the country out of economic desperation or political refugees. He claims that Zimbabwe is rebuilding the country, developing it. Who is developing it? In a recent survey on manpower requirement, government itself has admitted the country has got a shortage of qualified staff of 80% or more in most areas, in terms of engineers, teachers, doctors, nurses, and so forth. The few who are still in the country is failing to pay them a living wage. It's failing to keep them fully employed. Zimbabwe is a failed state. And if we're going to get out of it, it cannot be business as usual. We really have got to start thinking in a more radical way and confront our problems head on. I do not believe we can accomplish anything without changing the political system. Some people have argued that we should concentrate on investing and developing the country and leave the politics. That is being naive. We know that such problems as shortage of electricity are a political problem. As much as you would want to pretend that this is not a serious problem, it is. Who would want to invest in a country where power shortages, load shedding is taken as the norm? Some areas you may have no power for weeks, not months on end. Short of you investing in your business and extending it to the point where you have got to be self-sufficient in terms of electricity, your electricity needs, water and sanitation, roads, education for you and your workers and their children, health care, and so forth. You will never be an island of prosperity in the desert of despair. So the question of addressing the political failings is at the heart of solving Zimbabwe's social, economic, and political problems. We have got to address this problem of rigged elections and being stuck with a corrupt and incompetent regime with the urgency and seriousness the matter demands. And one of the ways of fighting it is having a competent opposition. People have risked life and limb to elect the opposition into positions of power and authority with the view that they would implement the democratic reforms to end this case of rigged elections. After 23 years, not even one token reform has been implemented. And somebody claims that God is in it. I think one has got to be incredibly naive to still believe that God is in it and we should not hold the individual to account. God is not in any of Chamisa's harebrained policies. God does not want somebody to tell him whom he should communicate with. I think this claim that God is in it is just him trying to hide behind the finger to justify doing what he's doing. And for most people to do nothing about holding him to account. This must change. We need to address the problems why Zimbabwe is a failed state. And getting a competent opposition is at the top of that. If you're going to fight, you need a competent army, well armed, to fight the enemy. Concentrating at Zanu PF with a corrupt and incompetent opposition is like going to war, a modern war, where the enemy will have guns, tanks, fighter jets, and you are going there with your bare arms to fight them. You have no chance. None. We need an opposition we can hold to account. And an opposition that is hiding behind God is in it. Particularly when we know that that opposition is corrupt and incompetent, and God could not possibly be in any of those harebrained schemes. We need to tell that opposition that enough is enough. God is not in any of your harebrained schemes. You need to account to us, the people of Zimbabwe, why you have failed to implement any meaningful reforms in the last 23 years. Why are you keeping on participating in flawed elections that you know yourself are flawed? And know that by participating, you're giving Zanu PF legitimacy. We cannot keep on pretending we don't know what is happening here. On that point, I would like to remind the listeners of a quotation from David Coulthard's book. This is one of the opposition's main leaders, David Coulthard, admitting that the election process is so flawed, so illegal, that it really, the only rational thing to have done to do, this was in 2013, was to withdraw. But he and his friends could not because of greed. Some people have come back and said, well, they could not withdraw because if they withdraw, some other small parties will participate. That is just the same way of saying greed. Because yes, of course, there's other small parties who will participate, but for the same reason, they are after the few gravy train seats that Zanu PF is giving away to the opposition to entice them to participate. As for the argument that by participating, those small oppositions will still give Zanu PF legitimacy, that is not true. It's not founded on history. There's no, the historic accounts actually shows that that is not true. In 1978, Ian Smith had his internal settlement, whose primary purpose was to give away a few seats to the blacks to entice them to participate in the internal settlement and give the process legitimacy. In the end, only Musorewa, Davaning Stole, and a few other small parties participated in the internal settlement. The two main parties, Zanu at the time and ZAPU, refused to participate. And the internal settlement did not get political legitimacy because of that. Anyone could see that the majority of the ordinary people did not participate in those elections. In this case here, even if we go by the ZEC result, if Triple C who got 43% did not participate, How can anyone seriously still maintain that the ordinary, the international community would have failed to see that this process was flawed? Of course, they would have seen it. We have got a serious challenge in Zimbabwe. I was hoping that SADC leaders would uphold the SADC report that condemned the recent elections as a farce and deny Zanu PF and their sidekick, Triple C, political legitimacy. This would have given the country the opportunity to go back to the 2008 to 2013 GNU, and this time hopefully implement the reforms. But it looks like that was wishful thinking, because SADC have decided, yes, they've taken note of the report, but they're not going to do anything about it. If we are going to get out of this mess, we, the ordinary Zimbabweans, have got to do the fighting ourselves. And that fighting must start by acknowledging reality. In the coming months, yes, maybe, I intend to follow up on this theme. How are we going to get out of this mess? Zimbabwe is a failed state. How are we going to get out of this mess? That is the challenge. And I hope that as we progress, we'll make some progress on that issue. I would like to re-emphasize to some of the people that I share the WhatsApp group with, who are furious that I am holding Chamisa and this Triple C to democratic account. I would want to reiterate it right here, that as far as I'm concerned, anyone who holds public office must be held to democratic account by ordinary citizens. There is no one who is untouchable. Yes, even those who claim that they've got the divine inspiration, I do not believe that that claim is actually justified. Because I do not believe God is ever involved in corruption and incompetence, particularly one that is causing so much misery to the ordinary people. I believe that people like Chamisa do not want to be held to account and are hiding behind claims that God is in it. They've got God's inspiration, when in reality they don't. And I think we should not be gullible to accept such nonsense. Chamisa is a mere mortal, fallible, indeed, with a historic track record of being incompetent and corrupt. And to be conned by someone like that again and again is bad enough. but let it continue happening is totally unacceptable. This is, I believe, where we are. And I think, and I hope, that many people are going to really open their eyes and see some of these politicians for who they are. Both Zanu PF and the opposition have taken advantage of the ignorance and naivety of the ordinary Zimbabweans out there. And that's the reason why they've been able to promise them the moon on a silver platter and deliver hell and get away with it for the last 43 years. I think the ordinary Zimbabweans must open their eyes. As I said, it cannot be business as usual. We have to change. With that, thank you very much for listening and good day.